Hello there, welcome to Free People, our second week in this series. Here's a question for you. What is the most dangerous thing that you've ever done? Hikes are usually safe if you take precautions. Your biggest risk when you take a hike are usually maybe dehydration or sprained ankles, blisters, sunburn, bug bites. However, there are some hikes that require a lot more skill and preparation. On these hikes, you might face dangers like heights and dangerous terrain and unpredictable climate. Enter the Maroon Bells. In Colorado, there are several mountains with peaks more than 14,000 feet above sea level. That is really high. These are often known as 14ers. Two of these peaks are called the Maroon Bells. Here's why the Maroon Bells are some of the most difficult peaks to climb. The total gain in elevation is 4,800 feet. The length is 12 miles round trip. The time it takes for you to climb and to complete is 7 hours. The summit, the very top of it, is 14,156 feet above sea level. There is an extremely high risk of exposure, meaning if you take a misstep and if you don't plan properly, you could slide off the trail and your injuries could be life-threatening, quite severe. There's not always a defined route up the mountain, so you often have to find your own way. People who hike the Maroon Bells know that they must take precautions and prepare for incredibly dangerous situations. Still, every year hikers are injured on this hike for a simple reason. They simply choose not to follow the safety guidelines. They get careless. They take unnecessary risks. They tempt fate and they stand too close to the edge. While most of us have probably never hiked a 14er, nothing compared to anything around here, there's something that we all have in common with these hikers. In this series, Free People, we're talking about freedom. We're talking about rules, and we're talking about how the two really can coexist. Whether you're fighting with your parents about your independence or you're just trying to figure out how to live out your faith, we all occasionally push back on rules that we don't like. So what do we have in common with these reckless hikers? Just like those hikers who get careless and sometimes take unnecessary risks, we all stand a little bit too close to the edge sometimes. Whether it's about dating and relationships, whether it's about the entertainment that we watch, the words that we say, the things that we think, or the way we behave, we often ask this one question. How far is too far? How close to the line can I get without technically doing something wrong? How much can I get away with before I get in trouble? How much can I bend a rule just a little bit just before I break it? Of course, some rules, it's fair to question some rules, and sometimes a little rule bending isn't that big of a deal. But when does rule bending become dangerous to us and to others? How far is too far? If you've ever pushed a boundary, if you've ever stood too close to the line, if you've ever bent a rule just to see if you could, I get it. I've been there way too many times. But instead of asking how far is too far, I want to give you an alternate question that will save you a ton of trouble, that will save you hurt and regret and damaged relationships that you will experience if you push the boundaries. Last week, we were introduced to James. This is James. Say hi, James. Hi. We learned that James was the brother of Jesus, and he was also the leader of the Jerusalem church during the early years of new disciples following Jesus, the very beginning. Here's a fun fact that you probably didn't know. James had a nickname. James is also known as James the Just. James earned that nickname because he was known for doing what was good and what was wise and what was honoring to God, even when it was difficult, even when it was unpopular, and especially when it was inconvenient. So I think James is pretty well qualified to give advice on what to do in situations where we don't want to cross the line, but we're also tempted to get as close to the line as possible. If you remember, James wrote a letter to help the Church of Jerusalem figure out how to live by God's law. James wasn't necessarily talking about the hundreds of religious laws that the Jewish people were accustomed to following. The law, the unofficial law that James wanted people to obey, was the law that Jesus gave, to love God and love others like we love ourselves. According to Jesus, if you follow the law of love, that's the rule that matters most. Even though this law sounds simple, it wasn't always easy for the early Jesus followers to know how to love God or others. And maybe it's not always easy for you as well. When James wrote this letter, people were figuring out how to follow Jesus for the first time, but Jesus was no longer there. Without Jesus in the flesh, they couldn't ask for help or clarity when they had a question about how to love God or others. And so to help the Church of Jerusalem, here's what James wrote.
Hi guys, James 1 verses 5 to 8. If you need wisdom, ask our generous God and he will give it to you. He will not rebuke you for asking. But when you ask him, be sure that your faith is in God alone. Do not waver, for a person with divided loyalty is as unsettled as the wave of the sea that is blown and tossed by the wind. Such people should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Their loyalty is divided between God and the world, and they are unstable in everything they do.
Okay, so we heard the word wisdom. What does wisdom mean? Wisdom is the ability to discern between right and wrong and everything in between. In a lot of situations that you may experience, there's not always a clear right or wrong choice. There's often a lot of gray in the middle between the black and the white. Instead, we might have to choose between what's good and what's best, or what's fun and what's risky. That is why we all need wisdom. Without wisdom, it's difficult to see the danger that we could bring on ourselves or others. We can get caught up in the moment, and it really only we get selfish and we forget about the future or the harm. But with wisdom's help, we can see danger ahead. We can avoid harmful situations before it's too late. We can learn how to escape an already messy situation. Okay, so Andy, I get wisdom, but how do I get it? James' solution was actually pretty simple. He says that all we need to do is ask. Okay, but how do you ask God for wisdom? Do you just pray and wait for God's voice to answer from the sky? Well, no, that's not how God speaks most of the time. When we ask God for wisdom, the answer to our prayer might come through other people. You might find wisdom from a conversation with a mentor, with a friend, with a teacher, or maybe a parent, or even a trusted adult. It might even come through a book or a movie or a song or a speech by someone that you've never met before. It might also come from experience. No one likes to experience failure or difficulty, but God can always redeem difficult situations by helping us gain wisdom through our experiences. It may come from history. There are a lot of people who have gone before us and passed down important lessons that they've learned. We can gain wisdom by looking at the ideas and the practices and the guidelines that have been passed down from previous generations. Last and most certainly not least, actually more important, we have the Bible. Let's take a quick listen and look at another passage that James would have been familiar with. This is from a book of the Bible full of wise sayings called Proverbs. Here's what it says.
Proverbs 27:12. A prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. The simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences.
So according to Solomon, the author of Proverbs, a wise person can see danger approaching before it's too late. A wise person will be able to predict how a situation could go wrong before it happens. A wise person sees a toxic relationship developing before they get hurt. A wise person will be able to identify a bad influence before they're negatively impacted. They're going to see how their action could cause regret before they ever take them. Now, the opposite of wise is foolish. A foolish person flirts with danger. They never see the warning signs, and if they do, they just simply disregard them because they just don't want to pay attention. They also eventually hurt themselves and others. They end up with regret. They carry on for years and years. They damage relationships that they actually care about. They lose opportunities that they worked hard to achieve. And when danger approaches, a wise person doesn't see how close they can get to danger. A wise person, they avoid danger as much as possible by taking precautions. If they have to get close to a dangerous situation, they call for help. They set up a safety net. They do their best to make sure that they can safely get through whatever situation they are facing. A wise person doesn't ask, how close to the danger can I get? They ask a better question. How far from danger can I stay? Like the hikers that we talked about earlier, wisdom means maintaining boundaries, not to keep us caged, but to keep us safe. Remember, the right rules set us free, and free people don't dance with danger. So now what? What does God want us to do about it? Imagine you're flying over the Grand Canyon and your face is pressed to the window. You're miles above the Grand Canyon, and this sight is so incredible and wild and it's actually quite dangerous too, that it's hard for your brain to process, that you decide that you need to get closer to experience it for yourself. And so when you land, you head over to the Grand Canyon and you're hoping to let your feet dangle over one of those incredible canyon ledges that you saw from the air that we often see from pictures. But when you arrive, here's what you see. What? Why would they put railings there? What an incredibly large inconvenience. What an eyesore. It is so unnecessary. I mean, you're standing near the edge of the cliff, and that won't always hurt you. It's only dangerous if you fall. So what an overreaction to keep us safe and keep the boundary in place. Okay, so I get the logic of that is a little ridiculous, but it's the same logic we use when it comes to rules that we don't like. Many rules that we hate to follow are actually guidelines designed to keep us safe. But instead of being thankful for these boundaries, we see them as enemies to our freedom. What do we do about danger? How do we approach it? How do we plan ahead? what do? Do we throw caution to the wind and do whatever we want? No, that's what incredibly foolish people do. So what's the opposite? Do we stay away from danger so far that we never leave our rooms because we're so afraid of making a mistake? We're so afraid of getting hurt. We're so afraid of falling and getting destroyed? Well, no, that's not the kind of abundant life that God wants for us. That's found in John 10:10. Look it up. You have to have a life, and God created you to have an abundant life. And so if we're so scared to live, we're not experiencing what God created us for. Just like these dangerous climbs have safety mechanisms in place to keep hikers safe, there are ways that you and I can prepare, that we can take precautions and create boundaries that will keep us safe as well. As I've talked, as you've listened, I'm guessing one of you have thought at least one line that you've been tempted to cross. You're not trying to fall into the Grand Canyon. Of course, that would be a little silly to try and do that on purpose, but you wouldn't mind sitting on the ledge and letting your feet dangle for a few minutes. You wouldn't mind crossing that safety barrier and just experiencing just a little bit. For you, maybe it's a temptation to push a boundary with your words and your friendships, and maybe what you view online or how you behave with a person that you're dating. Maybe you've been thinking, I don't want to do anything too dangerous. I just want to get a little closer to the line. I just want to see. Instead of dancing with danger, kind of going back and forth and testing it, wise people respect and keep healthy boundaries. But where do we need to place our boundary lines? First of all, respect the boundaries set for you, whether it's set by your youth pastor, or your parents, or maybe a mentor, or a friend, or a teacher. We're not always wise enough to know which boundaries we need to keep us safe, but trusted adults can give us safe boundaries. Parents, coaches, teachers, mentors can all help us avoid danger by setting up guardrails for us. Yes, I totally agree with you. It can be frustrating to respect the boundaries that we did not create ourselves. Sometimes the rules don't make sense. Sometimes they don't seem fair. But even when we don't like them, boundaries can keep us from future pain and regret that we will experience. Secondly, set your own boundaries. If you don't like being told what to do, then set your own boundaries proactively. In which areas do you need more boundaries? What boundaries do you struggle to maintain? What boundaries, what rules, what guidelines can you establish to keep you far from danger? The reality is this: when you have answers to those questions, you can begin placing healthy boundaries between you and danger. Do you need to turn off your phone or your device off at a certain time each night? Do you need to wait a little longer before dating, before getting serious? Do you need to spend less time with a certain friend? Are they a bad influence? That's a boundary. Do you need to give something up because it often brings you just too close to thinking wrong, to speaking wrong, to doing wrong things? Do you need to invite a trusted friend or adult into your life to help you make wise choices? It's not always easy to know what's wise, but like James says, if we need more wisdom, all we need to do is ask God for it. When wisdom tells us to avoid something, it's not because God wants to control us. It's because God wants to see us live free of unnecessary hurt. Remember, a wise person doesn't ask, how close to danger can I get? Instead, they ask, how far away from danger can I stay? The right rules set us free.